we're talking about site and content publisher communities. And just think about that term intranet champions that we all use overly too often. I think maybe we have to get past this idea of a champion to respect the in-depth work that publishers do throughout the year and throughout the life of an intranet. So a little bit of housekeeping first. Hello, my name's Wedge, and I'll introduce Suzie and myself properly in a second. We welcome your questions throughout this webinar, but we'll be answering them at the end. So if you wiggle your mouse over Zoom and find the Q&A panel, if you open the Q&A panel, you can type in your question into that Q&A panel and we'll be guaranteed to see it at the end of the webinar. If you use the chat panel, that's fine, but we may not see your question as easily. But certainly we'll try to help you in chat if you've got a technology problem or something. Yes, we are recording this webinar and I will send you the video via email. I think about 40% of people have joined us today, so that leaves 60% of people who are waiting for that video. So I appreciate that, that's no problem. Hopefully you can hear and see us reasonably well, but there is a telephone number in the email that you received an hour ago. If you've got bandwidth problems, what you can do is you can mute us on your screen and continue to watch the presentation, but dial in on your phone. So it's Suzie Robinson and me today. You can find both of us on LinkedIn and of course Twitter. Hi there, Suzie, how are you doing?
I am very good, thank you. I'm a bit disappointed that the weather has turned though, I have to be honest.
Yes, although I have had to start watering my garden because it has been quite a dry spell, so I don't mind too much.
That's very true.
We're both from Clearbox Consulting, of course. We've worked together for something like a couple of years now, is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Slowly past.
Yes, so we work in a bespoke boutique consultancy. We help organizations of all sizes work on their digital workplace. That doesn't always mean intranets. It often does, but doesn't always. What else do we do, Suzie?
We help people find all sorts of digital workplace technology. So we recently helped people find some people finding technology, which is quite different and very interesting as well, actually, nerding out with the research there.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so a quick poll, if you will, to start the session. If I press relaunch, this should show it to everybody, I'm hoping.
There we go.
So it's a loaded question. Is your existing publishing community active? Oh, thank you. That seems to be working. Everyone's voting. Just give you 10 seconds. Press your button now. Alrighty, thank you for that. Sorry if you miss out. Let's share the results.
Lovely. Okay. That's very interesting. A good split there of responses.
Yes, it's a bit of a bell curve spread. So some people probably great success going on. I hope we don't bore you. And some people hopefully logging in for some top tips on how to engage their publisher community today.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting there that there's some of you, or the biggest responses are, yes, the community responds well to prompts. So there's a little bit of not necessarily the self-help element going on there, which is, again, not especially, the community does not participate in self-help. So some really interesting replies there and not unusual responses, I think, as well.
Yes, you know, our ultimate goal is to have a responsive, proactive community, not merely a responsive community.
Absolutely. So having a look at our agenda then, we split our session into 3 bits to give it a little bit of structure. So we're translating these 3 points into basically who the community is and what they do in what spaces, the type of content that you can share with the community to keep them engaged, and how to go about making changes to the intranet with involvement from your community to make sure that they're happy and the intranet develops in the right ways. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about community spaces. And the first thing to really cover is, who are the community? Who are we talking about? We use a slightly broader term when we talk about the community as content owners. But that is quite a broad term, and those people will cover 1, 2, or 3 of these roles that are on screen now. So your content creators are those people who produce the content. They may be subject matter experts or skilled writers, or possibly not, they may still need some help, but they will be the ones that actually create whatever it is the content format takes. They may be content publishers, and they're the ones who will either physically upload content into an intranet, or they will transliterate whatever's been created by the creator into the intranet. And then the last role is the role of content approver. They have the overall accountability for the content, although they may not have the responsibility that may live with the creators or the publishers. They will probably approve the content either at the source point, so with the creator, or when it's in draft format, or when it's been placed on the intranet itself. So your content owner, as I say, could be 1, 2, or 3 of these roles. It really does vary from person to person.
Suzie, there are some people who only create content as a one-off. They often, get handed approved content, or they hand approved content to their designated publisher. Are those content creators part of this community?
I think they should be included, so it's always worthwhile including anybody who has some sort of responsibility for the intranet, and we'll come on to the reasons why in a little bit. But how active, how much they participate will probably vary depending on how senior they are. So it's worthwhile inviting them in, but you may have to manage your own expectations around how much their level of involvement is.
Just thinking about approving content, I understand that content might be very needs robust approval mechanisms, and there may be someone who's accountable for everything that has been written down in that 400 or 800 words. But I'd like to remember that it's the publisher who should be responsible for the end user experience of the intranet. So I think our publishers must be allowed to discuss the shape of content with the approver, with the content author, considering overly long pages and the lack of subheadings.
Absolutely, and they're probably the main focus of your community as well, so the people that you'll be talking to and thinking about the most often. So moving to the 3-parter here that's on screen now. If we think about delivery of the community, so where is it basically? On what? Is it Microsoft Teams plus, that back-end SharePoint site for all the documents? Or is it on Yammer? Is that what people prefer to do if they're from across the company and not really part of a team? Should they be on Yammer with a community SharePoint site as well? But of course, not everyone's using Microsoft systems. So you might have an independent intranet. And so does that mean you're using a forum or an equivalent chat system? And then of course, there's your in-person and virtual workshops as well. So when do you start building your communities? We would say all the time. So if you are building up to launch at the moment, if you are relaunching your intranet, then get people involved pre that launch date. Get them involved right from the very start, but then take them beyond. The launch date of an intranet isn't the final date that you're getting involved with your intranet as a whole, and the same should be true for the community. So it's important to get the space up and running as quickly as possible, but then maintain it post-launch and keep that really fresh and alive and going. And then in terms of content, there's a few different things that you can find or include and share with people through the content. So the first one is top down. So that's direction and resources. So that's things like how-to videos, training materials, and all those things that come from you as an intranet team and down and out to your community.
Second one is, of course, bottom-up queries and concerns. This community of expert publishers, it's a fantastic source of feedback about the intranet experience and the content quality. So the digital team should be listening to this community as primary feedbackers. So they can be user representatives, they can be user champions.
Yep, and that role is of feedbackers also then feeds into that next point around being side-to-side communications. So actually it's them producing feedback just by having conversations within these spaces, but also offering each other support as well. So if they need help, actually they may be able to help each other rather than all the responsibility being on the intranet team. And not forgetting, of course, that these people can be champions, as much as we don't necessarily want to use that word. They can champion the intranet beyond, so they can then pull in that side-to-side feedback in that sense as well. So that's our first section looked at. We're going to now move on to the second one, which is talking about the community space as a whole and how you can engage and develop people.
So I'm thinking that your community space should be where you discuss training needs, training offerings, training materials. These can be archived and saved or made available periodically. And I think your training schedule should kind of match your life cycle schedule so that people have the skills at each area of your life cycle. Now, I've put a basic life cycle on screen, but yours will be different, perhaps more detailed. I think the publisher community should be a place to plan your classroom training and your virtual classroom training. So you'll discover needs from people as they have concerns and questions and considerations about the new system. If you're revamping your system, they'll bring those concerns and questions to you, and you can therefore customize your training to meet those needs. So looking at numbers 1 to 4, what to create? The big question is, why create anything? Surely this has to start with user needs, what our colleagues need to work well. But yep, business needs will influence much of the intranet, but let's define those business needs rather than making assumptions. Number 2, in the life cycle, how to draft. Why not offer some consistent process tips so that people can more easily collaborate and help each other? We might assume that everyone knows how to draft a Word document and send it for review, but I still see some people attaching files and emailing stuff around. Horrendous. Also, if we mean to publish truly useful material, shouldn't we have a way of ensuring content is useful and needed before we spend hours drafting something? Content design techniques like user stories, job stories, and skeleton outlines help us start well. Number 3, where to publish. So the structure of the intranet may well have been set months or years ago, but I wonder if every publisher has a shared mental model. Department-focused intranets are the easiest to manage for publishers. They just publish to their own department section. But topic-focused intranets can be easy to navigate for end users. I think intranets can drift away from the planned information architecture unless publishers have a shared vision of the overall goal. And then number 4, the technical skills, the confidence and competence to publish directly within your intranet. So that might well be SharePoint training, intranet technology training. It might be about layout and page layout, using your page templates, but also some best practices like how to link to PDFs and how to link to other intranet pages. So we need a community space to share all this knowledge on an ongoing basis.
The training is so important, and Wedge has covered it really well there. And when you're thinking about your reference materials that you're going to share, the how-to guidance around your intranet, it should all absolutely accompany and not replace the training that you give. And in fact, the training shouldn't be a one-off again, thinking about the life cycle of an intranet. It's not all pre-launch training. Your training should continue as things change. So anything that you then write down or share afterwards should complement that completely. You should think about your larger reference material as well, though. So things like your governance guide, the planning materials for the project, even the original strategy document that again will be evolving. There is a home for those within this community, but it's not necessarily things that people are necessarily going to want to read from cover to cover, but they may dip in and out of it, and it's worthwhile sharing it just so that it's there. And linking to that kind of point is around the format of any of the content that you share around the how-to guidance. So whether you are looking at things like maybe creating something as a podcast as a way to explain a governance guidance, the way that you present that information is really important to engage people in different ways, because people learn in different ways. So sharing this sort of information so they can go back and dip in and out of it is important. But then, of course, your content needs to be findable as well. So any intranet guidance that you give to people around metadata and the titles of your content, you should apply to your own content, your own guidance. We recently had a client that shared their how-to guide for the whole intranet with us. And on the first page, it said that people very rarely read beyond the first page of any guide. And then the guide itself was about 40 pages long. So they hadn't even taken on their own guidance they were giving to people and applied it to their own materials. So just think about that as you're creating anything, whether it be over video or a written PDF or Word document. And as you go beyond launch, as time goes on, keep updating your guidance. Think about where any gaps are, think about where your frequently asked questions are, and then revisit those areas, fill in any gaps or float up to the surface anything that you think is particularly important or that people are missing.
So publishers need easy access to everything Susie just listed, as well as training materials. But I suggest these 4 items are critical. I hope your writing style guide will be a suite of intranet pages for easy linking and reference, but I can imagine your brand guide will be a PowerPoint or a PDF. Now, comms teams often provide an official image library, but I frequently see that it's incredibly hard to find. It's certainly hard to find when you're building a page and you need it, and people forget it exists. So please link to it directly from the publisher community as well as from the comms team site, and talk about it often, like every time new images are added. But I also wonder if appropriate external image libraries should also be listed that offer free to use images that come with copyright permissions. We need to stop people going to Google for images. So providing some decent sources can help. Ask me if you want my list.
It's a very good list.
I think as the Intranet manager or the digital team responsible for the intranet, you should be regularly blogging about the intranet's development. It's especially important if replacing or revamping your intranet. But just don't call it blogging. Blogging makes people think that the content will be overly personal or that it has to be weekly on the dot. All I mean is that the digital team should share their progress and their improvement roadmap and share tips and good practices to help the publisher community create a consistent user experience. Over the months, the news articles that the Intranet manager publishes will become valuable reference material for the small audience of the Intranet publisher community. The blog, as I'm calling it, could be private and only for the publisher community, or it could be published somewhere alongside the internal comms team's work in the open for anyone to find. When I did this myself at a large multinational many years ago, I published some good stuff, but I failed to gain an audience as this was in the dark ages and I didn't have a community space. I could only communicate with my publishers via email. So I think things have moved on in leaps and bounds, and I'm very grateful to see communities across intranets these days, either in Teams or in Yammer, as is often the case.
So we've talked about the communities as being somewhere to have that to and fro and bottom up questions and answering. Do you think that the blog is a place to be able to facilitate that now?
Yes, the blog isn't always, about making an announcement and telling people we are changing the intranet, it's becoming blue, it's becoming green. Often it's about reacting to what's going on the intranet and what the publishers really do need. So it's a two-way thing. I don't expect people to comment on blogs, but a new blog might create additional discussions within the community itself.
Okay. So, governance, the dreaded word that deserves its own presentation all by itself because it's such a big topic. Governance can be policed through communities, and policing is a horrible word for it because the governance guide itself shouldn't be this mighty tome filled with thou shalt or thou shalt not. But it is important for building an intranet, and so it's important to get governance right and in a way that people will engage with it. So don't necessarily expect people to read something if it is quite a thick, heavy number of pages, but they do need to absorb key points. They need to understand the key points of the guide. So think about the format of that as well. Create a digestible version. So think about a one-page version that you can share across your community and constantly refer to as well. You could also break it into pieces. So if there are different sections, again, you could consider creating different types of formats of content around the different sections of your guide. As people are unlikely to read all of it, when you do need to refer to it, try and guide them through the relevant points, so rather than just pointing them at a really long document. And also use it as a way to facilitate some of your questions that you're addressing as part of any of your training. So as people ask questions about it that are answered in the guide itself, that implies that they haven't read it, you know what you can include in any guidance or any other materials. Use it yourself as well. So make sure it covers situations like what to do when someone asks for a new intranet section, and use that guidance yourself to consider how that what that process should look like, and then guide people through it themselves when you come to tell other people about it. So make sure you're applying it, and if you find that there are any gaps, especially for your own processes, then evolve it, add things in there, change things, adapt it as new knowledge management software comes online, for example. Make sure it's working for the intranet as it is currently today, not the intranet as you launched it however many years ago. So kind of linked to that, and something that I've already mentioned, is around what do you do when there is a new person, either to the business as a whole or who is new to your publishing community. So the process of getting someone into the business will hopefully include some form of introduction to the intranet as a whole. So that may be that HR will guide them through something. You may have a dedicated section for new users. You may even have an LMS course that people can go through and find out why the intranet is so important, why they should be looking at it daily, what they can find there. And then if the new person is a publisher, or if there is someone new who's coming into your publishing community, you need to think about the process to get them onboarded and become a fully fledged publisher. So we would recommend these 5 steps. So first of all, will the request go to IT? Or will it go to the intranet team, or will it go somewhere else and then somehow make its way to you, or not? Will that other department maybe resolve the request themselves? Whoever it is, they need to understand the rest of the process and allow you to implement this process and go through it thoroughly. So the first point kind of after the request comes through is to train them up. So you need to make sure that the person is trained to the level that you're comfortable with, so that they can make changes to the intranet, so that it is reflecting the right structure, so they're writing things in the right way or transliterating things in the right way. Make sure they understand the governance and the architecture, the context behind the intranet, to make sure they're getting that all set up correctly, as well as what buttons to press as well, of course. So then once they are trained up, once they've had that initial bit of training, introduce them to the community. Of course, points 2 and 3 could happen at the same time, but introduce them to the community, show them where the materials live that they can refer back to a later point, introduce them to people that they can talk to get help from, and get them involved in that community and see what they are now a part of, to make it a real exciting part of their role, rather than just another thing that they've got to do that's not included in anything that they were told they had to do. And so then once you've got those 2 things done, then grant them the permissions, so that you know exactly what they're capable of doing, and then if they've got any problems, they know who to speak to, and they know they have a community of people around them to support. And then of course update your records. Hopefully the intranet itself will have some sort of overview, but we know that's not always the case. Some technology doesn't do that. But just make sure you have a record of who's been trained in what and what they should be looking after. Mostly so that you can include them in any top-up training later on, and some other activities that we'll come on to in a little bit.
So thinking about new starters, it sounds like you're saying that some people should be prepared to be responsible for the intranet officially as they start. Do you think HR is ready to add comms/intranet to general role descriptions?
I'd like to think so, because it's a conversation that's been happening for years now. I think it is worthwhile. The implication of what it means to be part of the publishing community is having one of those three roles. The importance that intranets can have within businesses and the corporate communications that go through, just that broad implication. There needs to be some sort of accountability for that and responsibility for that. The reality of whether these things are going to be added into job descriptions is questionable. I found in the past that getting a senior manager on side who can influence those conversations is a good starting point. So once you have a really well-performing intranet, that makes the argument much easier for you to take to them and then for take onwards as well. So that was part 2. We're now going into part 3. So this is how you can continually make changes to your intranet and evolve it over time whilst also keeping your community engaged. So something that we introduced to a client relatively recently was a quarterly meeting. So this is not necessarily the name that you have to keep for it, but that's just implies the frequency of it. And it went very well when we introduced it. It has a number of benefits. So it's a great way to keep the community engaged beyond launch as well, invested in its success. So to keep thinking about ways that it can be improved. So this also links in with getting feedback. These meetings will help you get feedback, not just from your publishing community, but also their colleagues who they speak to and who's maybe more candid with your publisher than they are with you about your intranet. It also will help you develop your intranet in the right ways and in relevant ways, because you've had that feedback from your community. You can understand where it is things that need to be changed and developed, and you can adjust your plans accordingly to do that. And then there's just a few tips here on how to make the meeting a success. So even if there is a senior person present, you can make it informal or fun in tone. That will encourage people to talk, so you can make them feel comfortable to share ideas and shared feedback. So just make it a little bit lighter in tone than maybe other meetings may be. If you ask for comments and feedback in advance, even if it's just on one specific topic, it takes the pressure off of them in the meeting to think suddenly and creatively and give feedback right then and there without necessarily having thought about a focused in subject in advance. And it also gives you something to talk about. So it's a way you can ease people into the meeting by sharing the comments that they've already sent you and then having a conversation around those things. Give yourself plenty of time within the meeting to dedicate to getting feedback though. So make this the main purpose of the quarterly meeting, and it will really be an invaluable exercise. So even if you are covering what you're doing with getting feedback from people in sharing other bits of information, still always constantly have that process happening in the background, and make sure that someone is taking notes for you who may even not be involved in the conversation, but make sure you're taking that feedback and recording it. And if you're meeting before the launch of your intranet, then share project plans with people to show how things are progressing, any deadlines and things they need to hit, and also showcase what the work in progress looks like. So actually show them what's going on, where the progress has gone, wireframes, things like that, so they can see how things are taking shape and understand how their content needs to work in the context of that. And even if the meeting is only an hour, break it into sections. And that will give you a defined set of topics to talk about, so you again can really hone in on those certain things. And if you share it in advance, and again they can be thinking about certain things. So if you want feedback on Yammer, for example, and how it's working within the intranet, you could dedicate 15 minutes to just talking about that, and broader communications as well. Whilst you may say we'll talk 15 minutes on this, this and this, don't interrupt if a conversation's going well. Of course you want that feedback, and if there's a really good conversation going, then throw your agenda out of the window if you're getting what you need from it. And then really importantly, take the actions away that you uncover from the conversation. take actions and work on them from one quarterly meeting to another, and then report back. You'll show them that their feedback matters, and also you'll show them what improvements you've made over time. So maybe not from one quarterly meeting to another, but then to the third one, there should be about 6 months between that, and you should have shown a real development and response to their feedback that can be really invaluable to the intranet and to the community as a whole.
Suzie, would these quarterly publisher meetings be at all linked to the quarterly steering group meetings in some way? You know, the steering group that represents all departments at a senior level.
I think they should be. So you may have one person from the steering group as a participant of this meeting. I wouldn't say bring through everybody, because then you make it a little bit more intimidating to share honest thoughts and feedback. But it's better to focus on the community and have more of them attend the quarterly meeting and act as that point of feedback, as someone who understands the intranet but then is also a user themselves. The output of the meeting, though, should absolutely be included in the agenda for the steering groups. So it may be that you get a particular piece of feedback from the quarterly meeting that means that your well thought out roadmap that you've discussed with the steering group actually needs to be adjusted. And so then you can discuss that and make changes. And going back to that point about taking actions and working on them, that's then again a way to say, well, we had said this would be our roadmap, but actually we've made changes and this is what it looks like now.
So thinking about the evolving structure, the evolving size of your intranet, as publishers publish more, they'll likely have some feelings about the site structure and the navigation menus. We all want our content to be in the navigation menus, which of course cannot happen. They may feel like the structures that you set up, you know, some months or years ago are just too restrictive, or maybe one category is filling up and needs splitting into subcategories. I counsel caution. First, let me ask you the purpose of your intranet structure. Is it to manage content or manage publisher permissions? Your answer should influence your approach to developing information architecture principles and intranet structures. My first principle for intranet size is that wide and shallow is better than deep. I'll just let you think about that for a second. A lot of people won't notice structure, though, unless they get lost in the depths of it. It's the intranet menus everyone has opinions about. The publisher community is a great place to get feedback and discuss options, but I suggest you'll need to share your user research results to prove that the menus are appropriate the way you have designed them. To make changes, we should perform fresh user research, basically tree tests, to discover people's navigation expectations. We want our publisher community to feel confident that the menus are based in evidence, even if they have strong opinions. If you've never tree tested your intranet navigation, please get in touch. We'd be happy to help. Thinking about content, the purpose of the intranet, the content. Your publisher community members will come from across the organization, and so you might think that they can't help each other with content reviews because they'll be reviewing departmental matters. And that's true for the facts laid out in any page, of course. But how we communicate those facts and how we lay out the details on the page can be reviewed by our colleagues who care about the reading experience and the end user experience. How often do we ourselves write something that we love only to need a second pair of eyes to tell us that the opening paragraph is too long and woolly, that we've failed to communicate the purpose of the page as we've made too many assumptions about the reader's knowledge? Our actual teammates and managers probably know our topics really well, so they're not always in a good position to critique our work if our work is supposed to be for the wider audience across the organization. The publisher community can be that second pair of eyes to sense check our content and page layouts to ensure that what we publish is easy to understand and looks consistent with the rest of the intranet. Additionally, the publisher community can help the whole organization adopt better ways of reviewing content by developing nice ways of working. In other words, using one single document and not emailing it around as an attachment, which creates out-of-date copies, of course. I've been saying this for 15 years, so I hope it doesn't happen in your org by now.
So thinking about older content then, Wedge, so say an ageing health and safety section that needs to be redone, what advice would you give around that with a content review?
Well, health and safety is specialist content, so only the health and safety people know what must be communicated, what must be adhered to, the legislation changes that have happened in the last year. However, your publisher community probably has some good feedback to offer about how it's laid out, how a person navigates that section of the internet, that site, that health and safety site, and how the details are laid out from top to bottom of the page. So it may be that while we can't comment on the facts and the details, we can really help with the layout of page and pages.
Absolutely. So we're going to open up the questions now. So while we open the Q&A panel, I've got a question for you, Wedge. You have been delivering a lot of training recently to clients. What have you seen as a common thread between that content training?
Yes, I've been doing repeated how to write for the intranet modules for different clients through this pandemic. And honestly, it's the different levels of care and competence among publisher teams. The publisher community is not homogenous. They didn't all say, hey, do you know what I'm going to do with my career? I'm going to work with intranets. They're a heterogeneous community. They've all got different backgrounds and different styles and approaches to communication. So there's a challenge in creating a consistent intranet with a consistent end user experience. That's the common thread. I'm just going forward a second. These are the 5 modules that have been most popular in the last 6 months. I've repeated these modules several times with different clients. And this is all about the end user experience and content quality. But we have got some additional questions coming in, Susie. I don't know if you can see. Can I mention Jean's question to you, Susie?
Yes.
Jean asks, what tactics do you recommend for getting deskless colleagues to participate in intranet or Yammer communities?
So I would recommend giving them a reason to be there. So if we're talking about deskless people being part of the publisher community, then they need to understand what they're going to get out of that publishing community space, so that there are things in there that will help with their day-to-day management of content. So if it's maybe a knowledge worker who is driving around all day from appointment to appointment, thinking about that kind of person, they may still be responsible for content on the internet. So they need to understand why being involved in that community will help them. And actually, if they aren't at a desk very often, when they do eventually sit down to work on something on the internet, they're probably also the people who may get the most frustrated, because they don't know how it works, they're not using it all the time. So actually that community can be there as a real area of support for them. And so having maybe a focus on that will help. In terms of getting deskless people onto your intranet or into Yammer anyway, not so much a community, but actually just getting them using it, again, it's the same kind of guidance. So giving them those hooks that really will get them in and draw them in, and giving them those practical reasons, and then giving the kind of fluffier things and more engaging things as a secondary element is good.
And just to add on to that for Jean, I'm sure we all agree that maybe the main company timeline of Yammer isn't always relevant to every employee. So it really is about the community. So there will probably be dozens or scores of Yammer communities out there, and we just have to have the right people in the right communities so that when they open the Yammer app on their phone, they see what they want to see. So Sarah Blackburn asks, hello there, Sarah, I think we've met. Creating creative, succinct content is hard. Yes, that's our challenge. Infographics, she says, are an excellent way of getting a message across, but many people wouldn't know where to start. Do we have any recommendations for a way to get started? Yes, I do. I've got strong opinions on infographics. Number one, it's only an infographic if it's driven by data. If it isn't really directly about data, then what you've created is an illustration. If you find yourself writing lots of words on an illustration, that is not an infographic. So your first starting point is stats. And we have lots of stats within the business. So start with those stats and then imagine how that can be communicated graphically. Now, if you're doing a real infographic like that with stats or an illustration with words, your starting point is probably your external creative agency. Mentioning no names, but having someone who is into graphic design on the team can be quite rare. So using your external marketing company, your external creative company, they will know what to do with those stats, and you can talk to them and can brief them. That's my answer. Start with data, and if it isn't data driven, it's merely an illustration. Is that right, Suzie?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I'm rubbish with illustrations, so I can't give any guidance. So absolutely working with the people that do is the best way forward. Another one, I think, which we can both answer, but I'm going to ask you first, Wedge. If you could only hire one resource for a new intranet, an intranet manager or a comms or content manager, which would you hire?
Oh, well, you know, my fluffy answer is it's all about the role description. You know, these roles have evolved in the last 10 years, and I'm not completely bang up to date. We all love content in the last 5 years, but previously to that, it was all about internal comms, and previous to that, it was all about intranets. But now it's about digital teams and shared responsibilities. So I don't know. Suzie?
I think that it depends on the company. So I have been in a few intranet roles in my time, and intranet manager roles, I should say. And each one of those, I also was responsible for content management and also a huge chunk of internal communication, because the companies I worked for didn't have those roles, or they didn't have a dedicated internal communications person. They may have had communications more generally, but not that kind of internal focus. And so I kind of agree that in a way it is all part of the same thing. So I would say an intranet manager can also be a comms and content manager. Comms and content managers may not also be intranet managers. It may be a task that they do. So it might be better to hire an intranet manager who is also responsible for the other bits. And then it depends on the individual. So when you interview them, seeing where their passions lie and whether you think they could also take on those other tasks as well.
Shall I ask Sarah's first question? Because I think that's the topic of our entire presentation today. Mm-hmm. Sarah asks, do you have any tips for engaging people who have a publishing aspect to their role, but struggle to dedicate time, perhaps even less willing to participate in the community and training? This is it. This is what we're talking about. The publisher community are often made up of people who have, we're not allowed to say day jobs, we're not allowed to say normal roles, we're not allowed to say all of that. We did 20 years ago, but actually their role is very full, and then publishing on the intranet is an ancillary task. It's an additional role within their major role. So we have to be sympathetic to these people. These are our colleagues, and they may not know everything that we know, and they may not be as interested as we are in the practicalities of publishing. Mm-hmm. So we have to be sympathetic and empathetic. We have to provide all of the tools that they need to be engaged in the community, and we have to make it easy. And that might be about prompting them. One of the things I notice, wherever I go for communities, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or anything, I just don't remember to go. I just don't remember to join in the conversation. It has to be in front of me on a regular basis so that I can choose to click in on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sadly, that might mean creating a newsletter digest just for your community to help people understand what conversations are going on in your community and what recent material has just been published. I don't know, Suzie, what do you think? Is it about comms or is it about aptitude?
I think it's a little bit of both, which is always a woolly answer, but I would say I think part of what helps is when you dedicate the time to them. So if you set everything up but then kind of walk away from it and hope that things will carry on, or if you do find there is an individual or two who may be struggling or kind of has the will but not the way to be able to dedicate the time to the community or to the intranet, then by giving them some attention, by giving them some care, by maybe taking on a few of the tasks for them to show how it can work, maybe simplify some things for them, then that can help as well. So actually spending that time with them, especially if they're responsible for a particularly important piece of the intranet. So using health and safety again as an example, if your health and safety manager is the only person within the business that looks after health and safety and is struggling to keep on top of everything within the business, that's obviously got a huge amount of implications to the legal and health and safety of people, then working with them and seeing how you can support and making sure their content is kept up to date and just giving them a bit more attention may help as well.
Yes, attention's the key word. Best thing I did when I was working in a company with hot desking is I sat with my internet publishers for a day. Yeah. And I just did my own work, but I helped them. They remembered to ask me things as they got on with their publishing. So it wasn't like a full-time thing, but during the day, there were minutes where I was helpful. And also I took on some roles. So I literally did some of their work as well, so that I could showcase how a page can best be produced.
Yeah, I did the same thing. It's that being friendly and being approachable, so that I know it does add to your own to-do list, but it does mean that people will seek you out and will ask for help, even if it isn't within the community as an online thing, because maybe they're embarrassed to ask about a very basic question. But if you're there and always available to be able to answer these questions, and that will help in the longer term with their engagement with the community.
Jenny asks, how do you encourage your community to publish accessible content? I'd like to have a go at this in two ways. Number one, let's define accessible. Lots of definitions. I just want to split it into two. Easy to understand and easy to read, and literally easy to access. So number one means let's write sentences that make sense. Let's write sentences that are short, sharp, succinct, full of meaning, and actually communicate well to an audience which may not know the context. So our content has to be accessible in a way that it is understood by everyone. Everyone is able to understand what's going on. But we also have to be able to ensure that the content is accessible. That means easy to access, regardless of technology setup. So what do I mean? Well, they have to be able to find your content, the basics of access. Can I access it at home? Probably yes. But then we have to think about actual accessibility with a capital A. For instance, when we put out an illustration or an infographic, as I've just discussed, an infographic with an X, info, it's fake, with lots of words on the image, those words on the image are inaccessible to some people using some tech. It just can't be read. The contrast is too low, they can't see the words. And their technology, which helps them read real intranet pages, won't be able to read the text that's embedded in an image. So yes, Suzie and I, we use text in an image for marketing purposes, but we don't put text in an image in our blogs and on our websites and on our intranets. We use real text, which is accessible. So we have to go through the principles of accessibility with our publisher community, and then we have to help them understand that we've set up these templates so that we can all build simple, easy to read, easy to access, text-based intranet pages. And that means not changing the size. That means not using red text. The templates are there to be used. Basically, the intranet is made up of simple text, paragraphs, subheadings, and lists, real lists, not just lists that we've handmade with a dash. So by sticking to simple page templates, our content can be accessible. And then it's up to us as skilled communicators to write in an information-rich and yet clear manner. Short, sharp sentences, lots of paragraph breaks. Jenny, if you have any content, any additional ideas, please do let us know in the chat panel.
Yeah, with accessibility, I will recommend two things. One, I can't remember the details of off the top of my head, but I will have a quick look and will share a link in my LinkedIn thread after this. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn already, then please feel free and I will find it and I will share it. Very good resource for thinking about accessibility and how to apply it to content, or the challenges that people that have these kind of accessibility needs face. And second, Invotra is a intranet vendor, but they also have a consulting arm, and they've done an awful lot around accessibility in the recent months. That's a very good resource for thinking about that sort of thing. So I would recommend going and have a look at that if that's something that's particularly important to you. Okay.
Sarah's second question asks if we've seen any examples of workplace by Facebook as an intranet community space. I haven't. I know lots of people use workplace by Facebook to announce lots of things, and the stream is very busy, but I haven't personally seen community spaces. I've only seen a very quick timeline, a very speedy timeline.
Workplace does have community group spaces, so you probably could for the conversational side of things. When we looked at it as part of the employee apps report that we've published in September, we found that the kind of intranet-y bits, so the document storage, document recall, wasn't as strong as something like Microsoft Teams. So if you want to share things like how-to guides and training, it might be trickier to use, but not impossible. You could definitely set it up if that's something that you have in your business, and particularly that conversational kind of live question and answer, side-to-side kind of support elements, you could definitely do through that.
James, our friend James, hello there James, he asks, have we ever used any tools that would undertake an accessibility check of an intranet? So the problem is getting these tools inside the firewall, giving these tools access to your intranet content. That's a challenge. You may take that challenge to IT, you may get that permission, so good luck with you. I haven't done it. What I have done is use online accessibility checkers to check individual parts of my content. So I will check for contrast if I'm choosing colors, which of course I should not be choosing colors because the color should be set by the brand guide. But when I need to, I use online contrast and color checkers to ensure that my content will eventually be accessible and high contrast. And you will usually find that your intranet vendor, whoever it is, claims to adhere to either the top or near the top of the standards of accessibility as based on these accessibility checkers that are available. May I remind you that that is the vendor claiming that their system, their CMS, is compliant or conforms well. As soon as you start adding content, you can damage that compliance. And so you're very wise to mention compliance and accessibility checking, because as the content builds up, it can change the conformance.
So I would follow up with saying that those two resources I mentioned earlier on, when I remember what the first one, how to get to the first one, and I will share it on LinkedIn afterwards. And Invotra, just for that guidance, they will, I think Invotra has mentioned a couple of those tools that will help you. So I can't remember the names of any, but I think that they have covered some.
Susie, when we put the video out, what we can do is we can add some additional links. So when you've remembered, get me the links.
Yeah, we'll do that as well, yeah. But also, as Wedge has said, that there are some vendors who will make those claims that they adhere to those certain standards, but then they will also have people within their customer success teams, or whatever they're called, within your chosen vendor, and they will be able to guide you as well. So if you do have any needs of this area, then absolutely speak with them, because they will have that experience from however many other clients that they've worked with, especially things like government bodies who have to have certain standards in place. So definitely use them as a resource to go and get some help.
Just as a final comment, unless there's any additional questions coming in, Jenny mentions a resource within Word, Excel and PowerPoint. If you go to the review tab, you will then see the check accessibility button. So that's handy for your Microsoft 365 files. And also remember, the readability checks are available in Word as well. Now, I find the readability checking to be incredibly strict, which is challenging when we're in a business environment and we often use business terminology. So sometimes I feel the readability checker is a little bit harsh. However, it's there as a tool to help guide you. And if you go to the review tab, you can check the accessibility of your PowerPoint and Word file as well.
Sarah sent through a question, which is, do you have any top tips for reducing that 40-page document down to a one-pager? So there is a term called kill your darlings, which is applied to editing content, which is when, especially if you've created that 40-page document and you've lovingly compiled everything, you've answered every question you can think of, and then you do have to chop it all out and reduce it down. That's what the kill your darlings phrase refers to. The tip I would say is to read things through and to think to yourself, if I cut this out, what would the implication be? And also, if you read an entire section, maybe 10 bullet points, if you look at those, are there any common themes between them that means that actually you can merge those together into something that's a bit more succinct, or potentially gives the kind of the flavour or the intent behind what you're saying, rather than the specified kind of 10 steps behind something or the 10 points behind something, just that gives that that kind of implication behind the law rather than the written law, as it were. Wedge, how about you?
Well, I'll try to be succinct. My top tip is that one intranet page should solve one problem. And so your original 40-pager, as a document, as a Word document, as a process, as a procedure, as a policy, that's not trying to solve one problem. It's trying to be comprehensive and solve 55 problems. So my top tip is that an intranet page, if it's a reference page, an intranet reference content page should solve or address one problem. And that means you'll probably need a suite of intranet pages, 12, 13, 14 intranet pages, all interlinked to cover a major topic. Alrighty, well, thanks ever so much. We've gone through quite a few questions there. That's really nice. Thank you ever so much. As I say, I have been repeatedly delivering these training modules virtually through the pandemic, and we often customize them for clients' needs. So if you'd like help to engage your content authors to create more consistent and cohesive intranet content, please drop us a line on hello@clearbox.co.uk. Also, if you're not sure where to start, Susie, what would you advise?
We have a new service that's only been around for a few months now, where we will review your intranet, and we will find those things that we will recommend that maybe you need to change, amend, start doing, stop doing, around 25 practical tasks. So we're calling it 25 ways to improve your intranet at the moment, and you can find it via that link on screen now.
Yes, you get a practical roadmap for the year ahead of you of the priority subjects that you might want to address, in our expert opinion. Well, thanks ever so much. Great to see you, Susie. I know we speak all the time, but it is nice to see you.
Yes, and thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Some really good questions and nice chat as well going on as well. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks ever so much. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.